Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited that you're able to join us today, and I value your time very much. I'd like to invite you to become a follower and supporter of the Growing Band Director podcast. Now, I'm sure you already listen to the show, and you've got some friends that are listening as well, and we really appreciate that. So if you keep that up, that'd be awesome. But we've now started growingband.com, which is a new website for us, and there's lots of ways you can interact with us. You can follow us on social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube by going on growingband.com and clicking on any of those to follow us. You can also find on there now a new merchandise store, which has the Growing Band Director podcast logo and some sayings on lots of different items on there for men and women. And there's things from t-shirts and sweatshirts to other clothing and accessories. Lots of different options on there with lots of different sizes and colors. Again, a little bit of that money comes back to us at the podcast to help us keep some content going for you. Finally, I'd like to invite you to become a Patreon member. This is a listener-supported show, which means we don't take any ads besides this one. Instead, we rely on listeners like you to keep us going, right? The way to support us is by going to growingband.com and clicking on the Patreon banner. And you can choose either $5 a month, $3 a month, and you'll gain access to the episode notes as well as an audio file of every episode we've done. Among other things, this is where you'll find our repertoire list and all the different repertoire podcasts we've done in the past and will do in the future. So whether it's by clicking on Patreon, following us on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, going to the merchandise store on growingband.com and ordering something for yourself or some family or friends, and also sharing the show with some other people. We really appreciate you being part of the show, and please reach out at any point, and there's a way to do that on growingband.com as well on the Contact Us button. Anyways, let's get to the show. I hope you enjoy it. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Growing Band Director podcast. My name is Kyle Smith, and joining me is my friend and colleague, Jeff Smith. Our mission is to share practical advice and explore topics that will help every band director, no matter your experience level, as well as music education students who are working to join us in the coming years. Together, we will discuss many aspects of a well-rounded band program, but most importantly, we will discuss concepts that help us all improve our own programs each and every day. Always remember the famous quote by Ray Kroc: "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're right, you rot." Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to the Growing Band Director podcast. I'm extremely excited to have Nick Mainella with me. Nick, how you doing today?
I am good. Thank you so much for having me. This should be fun.
I've been extremely impressed with all of your online jazz work that I've come across recently. I hate to say, we come from the same place at UNH and all that, even though I'm a little older than you are, I hate to say. But then I came across your podcast. Would you tell us a little bit about your podcast, what it's called, and what your mission is?
Yeah, so it's called the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, and it's something I started almost 5 years ago at this point, just as kind of like a fun way to put jazz lessons out there. And since then, it's grown into a little bit of a thing. And I've just been having a blast because it allows me to get some of these important lessons out to people literally all over the world. So basically, we put together around 10-minute. I have trouble keeping it under 10 minutes, but just a kind of a small slice of information, something to think about, something to work on for the week. And we've covered a ton of topics at this point, but that's basically what it is, a short form jazz education podcast.
Well, I think it's brilliant. I mean, when you say the 10-minute, it's like, well, anybody can do that,
Right.
But what I love about when I listen to your podcast, the lessons you give are very specific, right? They're not like kind of all over the place. All the ones I've listened to so far are very specific. Your voice and your mannerism is very relaxing and calm, which I think is good for learning, right? And you don't hurry through things, which I would tend to do. It's like you take your very specific amount of time to do it. And I think you cover it very well. But what I love about your thought to put it on the podcast is that, you're there all the time for people. So they can go back and re-listen. They can pause and go back and do it again. It's like a class, but they have ultimate control over how they're accessing your material.
That is kind of the nice thing. And one of the things I always tell the students of the podcast is like, if you're not ready for this, just make a note, come back to this whenever, because they're going to live online forever. So that's a really nice thing too. You can go back through the 320 something episodes and find a topic that's kind of perfect for where you're at in the current moment. And something that I'm working on right now is putting together a couple of different tracks through the podcast. So, if you want to get better at bebop, do these, 50 lessons in order. So that's something that will hopefully be coming soon. But I think you're right. And that's one of the beautiful things about it, is that it's kind of a living archive of just thoughts that are there for you when you need them.
I actually wonder, and I'm not trying to get out of work here, but if because I have an improv class, right? But I haven't taught them since I've discovered your podcast. Would it actually be like, is there a way for me to go back and maybe, like, am I allowed to use that as part of my, and say, turn on the podcast and the lesson for this week is this.
Yep.
Help you be my teacher along with me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I hope that people use it that way. Because I teach a lot of younger students myself. Most of my lessons are middle school, high school students. And it's great to have at times a thing that is not the person that's standing in front of them every day,
Amen.
Teaching them a concept, but then they know they can come to you for, well, I did listen to the podcast and, I learned this, this, and this, but can you explain this one thing a little bit further to me? Because, obviously they trust you, you're their teacher.
Right.
They understand how you explain things. So I hope more band directors use it that way. And I'm always available. I love talking to band directors. That runs in my family. My most important mentors were some of my band directors. My father's a band director. So I am always happy to dive a little bit deeper with anybody out there who wants to talk further about any of these lessons.
Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your dad?
Yeah, absolutely. So my father has been a band director at Timberlane School District, which is in southern New Hampshire, for over 40 years at this point.
Amazing.
And he is definitely one of my biggest inspirations, both in being a musician and in being a music teacher. To see somebody in their 40, I think it's like his 43rd year of teaching music, be as passionate about it and care about the kids just as much as 20 years ago is extremely inspirational to me. And on top of that, the amount of music that happened in my house when I was growing up, I can definitely point to my dad as the main reason that I'm a musician today. He was always playing saxophone around the house, and that's my main instrument is saxophone. His record collection was insane. Some of the greatest music ever recorded was just kind of kicking around my house and being played at all times.
Yeah.
He used to play the stuff loud, which I really appreciate now too, because it was like you couldn't ignore it. So he has just been somebody who throughout the years has been a continued inspiration. And when I start to feel like a little bit burnt out, or some of those feelings that we all get, like, am I doing the right thing with my life? He has been kind of a great anchor to me, where it's like, this person has been through everything you could ever go through as a teacher and come out on the other side as still one of the best teachers that I know of. So it's been great.
So you talk about his passion. Is there like one other thing that really stands out to you about something that makes him a really good teacher?
That's a really great question. And this might sound funny, but he does not take himself seriously. And that is like one of the biggest things that stands out in my mind to me, is that he teaches the younger age group now. So for the past 5 years, he's actually switched into an elementary school role. And one of the biggest things that I've learned from him is that you really have to meet those kids on their level. And honestly, it's less about music and more about having fun.
Hmm.
So if you can make music fun and be goofy and funny and tell bad jokes and kind of make a fool out of yourself, it goes such a long way to those kids associating music with fun.
Hmm.
Being in this room with this person is the best part of my day. And oh, I have an instrument in my hands while I'm in the room with this person. So therefore, having this instrument in my hands equals fun.
Hmm.
I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned from him is that he doesn't take himself seriously, and the results he gets from the students are amazing because of that.
And he's been able to establish himself. So, if a new teacher came in somewhere and they were just like goofy right away, well, the kids might walk all over them, right?
Right, right.
So everybody take that for how it can apply to you, but that's an amazing lesson.
And he also does have an incredible ability of kind of demanding a certain level from the
Hmm.
students
Hmm.
while maintaining that quality of making it fun. And that's really like a masterful thing to do as a
Yes.
teacher
Yes.
is they're listening. He has their full attention, but they're also having a blast.
That's amazing. That's such a good thing to strive that we all strive for. I mean, if that's the whole podcast right there, we just covered the secret of teaching. But we are dedicating today to jazz education. Um, and I will point out we've done a couple jazz episodes so far in our first 32. Episode 1 was called Teaching the Jazz Band, and then episode 25 we did on the Growing Band Director podcast was with great teacher and writer and player Craig Skeffington, and
Mm,
that's been one of our most popular ones as well. So I'm really,
okay.
we really try to hit like older band, younger band, jazz band, concert band, marching band. I try to do as much as possible. So
Awesome.
I'm really excited to do this. So I thought we would start with, can we start with the blues?
Yeah,
I think it'd
absolutely.
be great if we started with the blues, because I think we've all heard kids play on the blues because a lot of people know that blues is a really important form. They know, I remember one of my mentors, Dave Seiler, right? He always said every program you program's got to have a blues, right? No, so I
Yep.
understand that. I can't say that I have actually done that every single time. Um, but can we first get into like why the blues? Like maybe a brief, what is the blues? Where does it come from? Why is it important that we use it?
Absolutely. So, like starting from the very beginning,
Yeah, in
um,
in a condensed form.
yeah. So there's not that much purely American music,
Hmm.
right? And I think that that's really important. Um, the blues is one of those forms of music. It is purely American. So it makes sense that jazz that largely came after the blues or was concurrent with early blues
Hmm.
would be extremely influenced by that form of music. Now, jazz musicians have taken, Charlie Parker, when he plays the blues, doesn't sound like Muddy Waters playing the blues, right?
Hmm.
So, jazz musicians, as they are prone to doing, took it and made it something different, right?
Hmm.
But the DNA, the form, the chord progression, it's still largely intact from the most traditional blues that you could think of.
And it is a universal language. You can go anywhere in the world with jazz musicians or any musician say, we're going to play the blues, and everybody knows what that means.
Exactly.
For anybody listening who might not know what the most basic form of the blues is, can we talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 12 bar blues is what we start with in jazz. And I would say, even when you become the best jazz musician in the world, 95% of the blues that you're going to play is going to be that 12 bar blues.
Hmm.
So there's a couple of advantages to this, especially with students in the classroom. First of all, 12 bars is not that many measures. So it's easy to keep track of, right?
Hmm.
And with minimal effort, students will actually start to hear where the top of that form comes around again. And the other really, really good thing about it is that you can give students an extremely simple device
Hmm.
that they can just go wild with, right? And for somebody like myself who's been, studying jazz almost 30 years at this point, I'm still using in my solos that basic device for a lot of the things that I play, right?
Hmm.
So it's not like you're teaching them something that is not what they're going to keep using when they get advanced enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great place to start, and it's honestly a great thing to use for the rest of your life as a jazz musician. And then the third thing is, which is a little bit more advanced, is that I think about the blues and the chords that are present in the blues, that 12 bar progression. It's kind of like a microcosm of the entire jazz language, of jazz harmony, right? So I can point to certain chord transitions that happen, certain sections of the form, and I can very, very honestly say you are going to see that tens of thousands of times in your life as a jazz musician when you start playing other repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
So, three really, really fantastic reasons to teach the blues, and why it would be so valuable for a student.
Okay. So we both despise the blues scale, right? We have
Right.
that in common.
Yeah.
Because that sharp four, people just play. They
Right.
just play, and then they play it on the four chord, and they clearly
Mm-hmm.
don't know how to use it, right? So it's not that the blues scale is bad. It's just until you know how to use it, right? I mean, is there a great player that you've heard that has never used the blues scale? I mean,
No.
everybody uses it at some point,
Right.
but
Exactly.
it's really not the best way to start. So
It is,
let's
in fact, one of the worst things to start with because there are landmines like every other note.
Yep.
Right. And we could get into the extremely technical reasons why they're landmines, but maybe we could leave that for another day. But let me boil it down to there are three notes in the blues scale that don't work over half of the chords and are in fact like the worst notes
Yep.
over some of those chords. So for instance, the fourth over a major chord.
Yep.
So you can imagine that if that is the first device that you're giving to students, I mean, they are not going to want to ever improvise again because they have literally like a upwards of 40% chance of landing on the wrong note at all times.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reason that I hate the blues scale for beginners. It's one of the worst things to teach.
Okay. So what should we teach?
Okay, so the blues scale is one. I'm going to grab my horn and play this a little bit for you.
Yes, please.
So the blues scale is based off of a minor pentatonic scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, a minor pentatonic scale from the root is 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. So it sounds like this. And then the blues scale, what we're doing is we're also adding a flat 5 to that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now we get.
But that sound is like crack for people.
Yes,
Like kids hear
exactly.
that, they're like, "Oh, that's amazing," and that's all I ever want to
Right.
use.
Right. And now it is funny because on its own, really, really hip scale, really, really cool sounding collection of notes. Now it's when you start interacting with a rhythm section that it's not so hip anymore
Mm-hmm.
if you don't know how to use it. So what we want to do is we want to actually come up with a scale that's based off of the major pentatonic scale, right? So if I were to play a major pentatonic scale in that same key, we got 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. And I would agree with you, that's like a lot less hip sounding,
Mm-hmm.
but we're going to actually change it to make it a little bit more bluesy. So the only change that we're going to make is we're going to flat the third. So now it becomes 1, 2, flat 3, 5, 6. And what this does is it literally removes all of the problem notes in the blues scale
Mm-hmm.
and replaces them with great notes that do work over the entire form. So let's think about what we're doing. We're taking the 4 and we're replacing it with the 2. And then we're taking the flat 7 and we're replacing it with the 6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So all of you out there, go and compare those two notes over the chords in the blues. And you'll start to see what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. So when do they use the flat three and when do they use the major three? Do you deal with just hear, like, do you try to get them to hear the four chord and then play it at the right time? Or do you talk about
So
where does it actually happen?
I don't let them play the major third when they're first starting
Okay.
because there's actually no need for it, right? I mean, the flat third over a dominant chord is what we call the blue note, right? That is the definition of the blue note.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't need it. They don't need it. Then if you have a student that starts to show some interest and promise in improvisation, that is actually a fantastic thing to do to get them to that next level.
Okay.
So we'll tell them, okay, well, now we're going to add this one note. We're going to add the major third. But here's the thing, you can't use it over the second bar, and you also can't use it over bars 5 and 6. Now you've got them actually thinking about where they are in the form, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not asking them to keep track of every single measure in the blues. I'm asking them to start to identify a couple of places in the progression, and now that's starting to get them to think on a deeper level, starting to introduce them to this thought of, oh, well, some musicians are actually thinking about every measure. And they're actually playing stuff that's far more complicated than just using one scale.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great way to just like get the brain to cross that barrier of I use one thing for the entire form to, okay, now I need to know where I am.
See, it's funny because I've actually approached it the opposite way in our, and we haven't talked about this at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've always used 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, knowing
Okay.
that they're probably going to be playing the wrong note on the four chord, but there's only two measures of that versus all the other measures, right?
Right.
So I've always tried to get my kids to understand that it is a major chord and to know the fundamental of what the major is
Mm-hmm.
before we can talk about what the blue note is. So I'm actually
Okay.
really I really like that approach, your approach of just going with the flat three and then trying to use both later.
Because that's a thing that actually I didn't realize until I was a lot older is that playing a major sound, especially over a dominant chord, a lot of times is actually very, very undesirable,
Hmm.
right? Like we talk about the musical tradition of the blues. And if you do go back to some of those more traditional blues musicians, man, they would never even think about playing a major third over a dominant chord. Like that would be heresy for them,
Right.
right? So I like actually approaching it from the other direction, and then when you get to that major third, it's like such a novel sound to the
Hmm.
student. Oh, okay. I didn't even realize that this dimension of playing over the blues existed. But if you use the minor third, you actually get much more of a characteristic blues sound, which I think is good to get into their ears early. Because I mean, let's face it, like even the most cerebral of jazz, it has to have soul. And I
Hmm.
think a big part of the soul is the elements of the blues, like
Hmm.
using the blue note.
Interesting, because I've always thought like, okay, if we're going to go to a festival and I have a kid who's soloing on the blues, if they just play the flat third all the time, judges are going to go, hey, you have to learn the harmony, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But your point is really, really well taken, and I'm going to take that approach this coming year.
Yeah, I think it definitely does make a difference. And one thing that I think is important, especially for the kids starting out, is that we place a high degree of importance on somebody that's better than you giving you advice. But I also think it can be important to tell the student, like, that is a great piece of advice, but I don't know if you're ready for it yet. I
Hmm.
think you're doing great where you are right now. Let's continue down this path for a little bit longer. And then we're going to talk about that suggestion that judge gave 2 months from now,
Hmm.
you know? But it's such a tricky thing. It really, really is.
That's awesome. So now if we can transition a little bit to actually getting kids to improvise and feeling
Yeah.
comfortable improvising, right? So I know we talk about um, that's the biggest thing, just getting kids to be comfortable doing it. We did have an episode, I think it was episode 18, with, if people don't know Barry Saunders, he's an amazing, long established saxophone player, jazz musician, all over musician, great guy.
Yep.
Um, and his was called, it was basically all about this, right? It was about eliminating the fear and embracing the fun. So
And
that's a,
Barry's one of the funnest people at that. I know. He could have fun no matter what the situation is. So he is definitely a great person to speak to that.
Okay, so let's hear your take. How are we going to approach this?
Okay, so my biggest thing is that you basically just have to normalize improvising. So there's no way around kids being apprehensive
Hmm.
about improvising. Like it just is a thing that's going to happen. But if you don't make a big deal about it, and from day one of their time with you when it comes to jazz, it's like, oh yeah, well, what we do is we improvise in here. And it doesn't have to be amazing, you know. But what we do is we make stuff up on the spot,
Hmm.
right? And it could be as simple as like, okay, everybody, we're going to go around the room. No backing track, no nothing. We're going to go around the room and everybody's going to make something up for 2 seconds. 2 seconds,
Hmm.
right? And the kids will hesitate, then they will play something. And then by the time they even like their brains even get to the point of like, I don't know what to do next, you've pointed to the next person,
Yep.
right? And that will just start to change their, oh, well, improvising isn't so hard. I only have to play for 2 seconds. I only have to use one note if I want to, you know? And they'll just start to, it'll start to become normalized to them. I mean, oh, improvising is a part of jazz band,
And
right?
when you give them feedback, I mean, you probably don't give them feedback for a while, right? Everything they do,
Exactly.
that was great. It just is what it is. You just move on. There's no reason for them to doubt what they did.
No, no. And there's also no rules. If a kid needs direction, like you could say to everybody, okay, we're going to improvise. You could use for 2 seconds, you can use whatever notes you want. Totally fine. Play all of them if you want to in that 2 seconds. Great, whatever. But if a kid is like, gets that deer in the headlights look,
Hmm.
you could also say, okay, so for anybody who is unsure about what note to play, just play concert B flat. Just start on a concert B flat.
Hmm.
That's totally fine too. So now you're kind of like holding the hand of the most apprehensive kids,
Hmm.
but you're still doing that thing where it's just like we all improvise. That's just something we do in this hour of school every day.
And how do you take that going forward once you've done that?
So once I normalize it a little bit, then I will actually start to, all right, well, let's learn that pentatonic scale, that major based pentatonic scale. Okay. So we all learn it. I never put a piece of paper in front of them, right? We're gonna learn it together and I'm gonna play it every day,
Hmm.
3 times through, something like that. Now, once the band is starting to get that sound in their
I'm going
ears,
to interrupt you real quick.
yeah.
Do you point out like instances in say pop culture where the pentatonic is used?
Um, I've never done that. I've
Okay.
never done that. Maybe that is something I should start doing.
My go-to is the McDonald's theme.
Oh yeah,
You
that's
know,
great.
you use something that they know this already. So this is not some foreign sound, some jazz thing. They're literally just playing something they already know.
That's great. Man, I never even thought of that. That's
Okay,
that's really
I
wonderful.
contributed something there.
I
Yeah, that's
love it. I love it. I'm going to start doing that. So I'll just get them to start playing it, get it to be something that's in their ears and under their fingers.
Hmm.
And then I will actually start to, okay, now we're going to play over this form called the blues, but I won't let them use the entire scale,
Hmm.
right? Because they will, and they will heavily attempt to use the entire scale.
They'll think about the notes, but they won't think about their rhythm.
Hmm. Exactly. Um, and then one thing that I'm really, really fond of doing, and this took me a long time to figure out, I think I'll limit them to 2 notes. Okay. And
Hmm.
I'm not letting them play 12 bars. I'm not going to go from 2 seconds of improvising to, all right, now play all 12 bars. I might do trading twos or trading fours, trying to just keep that time horizon a little bit shorter so that they
Hmm.
have less time to think.
Sure.
Um, and I will give them 2 notes, the 1 and the 6 below it. Now, it's pretty amazing. We always think about being studied musicians, the seventh as being like the leading tone.
Hmm.
But in jazz, The 6 is really, really, for lack of a better term, the leading tone in a lot of jazz, right? So if I'm playing some licks using that pentatonic scale, I'm going to end every phrase with the 6 going back to 1, and check out the amount of gravity that it gives. It's that characteristic sound that we hear a lot, but maybe we've never thought about it before. So I love starting them with the 1 and the 6.
That's awesome.
And that's kind of my initial process, right? It's really just more about the act of doing. And again, that act of normalizing the fact that we all make stuff up.
One of the things I like to do is utilize group improvisation to help them get comfortable as well. So maybe they have a partner and they both improvise at the same time, or in a larger group. I found that helps with the normalization process as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's great for those kids that are just so terrified to put themselves out there a little bit. It's like, all right, I've got this other person. And the other thing about that pentatonic scale that's fantastic is that even if you have your whole group playing it at once, it actually tends to sound pretty good,
Right.
because we're playing the best notes.
For the same reason that if you teach a kid to improvise on the piano like day one, sometimes you can have them just play the black keys.
Right.
It's the pentatonic scale and there's
Exactly.
no quote unquote wrong notes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's do some work on how about jazz articulation?
Mm.
You know, when I was talking with Craig Skeffington a while ago on the podcast, you know, we both agreed that, you know, if your band is playing what you think is on the paper and they're not, they just don't sound the way you want them to sound, right? If things are quote unquote right, but it doesn't swing the way the recording swings, the answer is always the articulation is not correct.
Absolutely.
Right?
All right. So when it comes to jazz articulation, on a bigger level, I like to relate it to speaking languages. Because that's generally all your students are going to be in a language class. So it's a great place to start. So for instance, you could have a fantastic vocabulary. You could know how to put together sentences in Spanish, for instance. But if you are not pronouncing the syllables in the correct way, it is immediately evident that you are not a native speaker of that language, right? You could tell right from the first 5 words. Okay, this person has a command of what the vocabulary, but they don't have a command of how to use the vocabulary in the correct way. So if we think about articulation like that, it's kind of a great place to start. So my number one tip, and this goes towards like another topic, which is the importance of listening. And just like we're trying to normalize improvising, we also want to normalize listening, because you cannot be a good jazz musician without listening. Like, you just can't. It is one of the truths of jazz. You cannot do it. It's impossible.
And you can, if a kid doesn't believe you, you talk about how they learn language from the time they're tiny, right? They listen for 4 years before they read anything.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's such a fantastic way to relate it to something that they can grasp. So the listening is going to be where you're going to get the core ideas, but we can like quantitatively talk about some of the things that are going to help a lot. Okay. And one of the biggest things that I hear is eighth notes are too short. So, for instance, it's the difference between this. Right? That sounds cheesy, right? That sounds like bad jazz. And I hear this misdiagnosed a lot. A lot of teachers will say like, "Well, you're not swinging enough." I was swinging. I was playing swing time there. Those notes were swinging.
And that's also not a specific fix. You're just saying you're not doing this enough. That doesn't, well, what's a kid supposed to do with that?
Exactly. And I used to say that because I didn't know how to articulate
Mm-hmm.
myself in the classroom. I said, well, there's something wrong with your swing. You need to. And then one day I was like, oh, it's all the articulation. They
Mm-hmm.
are swinging. It's the articulation that's not working.
Because
So
swing, we refer to swing as 2/3 of the beat versus 1/3 of the beat, right?
exactly. And
Almost like 6/8 time.
that's really important as well. Swing is based on triplets. It's not most of the time based off of dotted quarter note 16th.
Mm-hmm.
There are types of swing and people who do utilize that feel, but I think it's great to teach it as a triplet with the middle one removed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, anyways, if I play that same line, but all I do is I connect the notes together, no space in between them, it completely transforms the sound.
Mm-hmm.
Still tonguing almost every single note,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's a much lighter tongue and there's
Mm-hmm.
no space whatsoever. Okay. So that is what I find to be the biggest improvement right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
Connect your notes. And you could use syllables, right? Like we all know from going to UNH, the doodle tonguing system,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the sort of the core of the doodle tonguing system, if you really, really think about it, is to eliminate all spaces between notes.
Yep.
Because when you go doodle, that one syllable leads directly into the other,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore it sounds a lot better, as opposed to going da 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 da, right? Or la 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 la. You could hear that's much more choppy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when we say doodle, that is the opposite of choppy. It's the smoothest thing that I've ever heard.
And you have them tongue before you start talking about possibly offbeat articulation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's so much to think about, right? It's so much to think about at once. Okay, now accent the offbeats.
Mm-hmm.
And to tell you the truth, I never made a conscious effort to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Once I realized that I needed a lighter tongue and no space, the the entire rest of my education on jazz articulation came from recordings.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Because you had a
I
mental model that you were trying to go after, right?
exactly,
So,
exactly.
sorry, when we talk about the offbeat articulation in public school teaching, for me, it's more about, okay, I have a saxophone section right now who's playing an eighth note line. They're at all different varying levels of listening and mental model and all that. The minute we
Mhm.
have them slur the offbeat to the onbeat, offbeat to the onbeat, it not only and you make it sure it's every note is long, then they're long and they're swinging because they're putting the accent on the offbeat.
Yep.
I understand in an improvisation standpoint, that's probably not the direct way to do it.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. And
Yep.
here's something that I would say that I think could go a long way with band directors is don't this is a tough one. Um, Make sure you program something where there is a classic recording of
Mm-hmm.
that same tune,
Yep.
right? Because we need to go back and listen to how it's really, really, really supposed to be played. And then it eliminates all the discussion around it. You know, one of the things I hate most when I'm teaching an ensemble is like going through a section note by note and trying to explain to the students
Mm-hmm.
like play this note this way, then play this note this way, then play this note this. Their eyes glaze over, and honestly, mine do too. So if I can say, all right, go to measure 24. Now listen,
Mm-hmm.
listen and follow along. All right, let's listen again. Okay, now let's sing it. Okay, now play it just like you sang it.
Mm-hmm.
Figure out a way to take what you just sang and what you just heard and transfer it to your instrument. And it's not going to be perfect right away. Now I can help them along, give them some tips on how to translate what they just heard
Mm-hmm.
into what they're playing. But again, there's just no substitute for hearing and emulating.
One trick that I use that has worked really well is I'll have kids with headphones on,
Mm-hmm.
and have them play with the recording at the exact same time. Now, the downside is they can't hear themselves as much, but no matter what they play, they sound like Miles Davis, because you got Miles
Absolutely.
Davis in your ear. So to me, I found the more they do that, not just listening, but also playing with them synchronously is a
Mm-hmm.
great thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And exposing them to all of that music is, like I'm reading the Michael Brecker biography right now, and he talks about Michael Brecker started on clarinet and didn't really enjoy it because it was mostly classical music. Heard Benny Goodman, still didn't enjoy it because he didn't like the way that Benny Goodman played the clarinet.
Hmm.
And then the turning point was he heard Jimmy Giuffre playing the clarinet and it just like spoke to him. And he wasn't into music at all up to this point until he heard the thing that was like, that is cool. I want to
Hmm.
sound like that. And then the story is that he like, he figured out, he transcribed every single Jimmy Giuffre thing that he had in his house.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, music was his thing, right? And then he eventually picked up the saxophone, really fell in love, Coltrane, all that stuff. But I mean, it's the more I read about my favorite musicians, the more I understand like it was listening and imitating.
Hmm.
That's what got every great musician started.
And what's a bigger picture as part of that too, even more macro, is the study of history in general.
Right.
Understanding that there is history to things, and if you want to change certain things about how things are, that's okay as long as you understand the history behind it. So often
Absolutely.
we think that people that are older or have already passed on, that they didn't live all the same struggles that we live, right? So that understanding that there was things before you, right, and that you are just continuing on and there will be things after you, is a really big life lesson for kids too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Um, I just wanted to put a plug in. I forgot to do this at the very beginning, and I forgive me. What's the name of your YouTube channel?
It's just under my name, Nick Mainella.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily affiliated with your podcast. Like it's not called the
No,
same thing.
no, that was something that I had started like even before the podcast,
Hmm.
and I just decided to keep it under my name.
Well, what I watched a video the other day. I have to admit I have not watched all of them because there is a heck of a lot.
There's a
But
lot of that.
there was a video that you did where you did the instant react video, where
Hmm.
you have the was it Stan Getz? I forget the
Yep.
tune. But there was this transcription on, and you just reacted and pointed out the great things about that transcription. So I would just point people to your YouTube channel as well. There's lots of great stuff on there.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's way more important, way better than watching whatever's on TV. Like, there's like, how many channels do you have? Like 100. There's nothing on it. Let's go on
Right,
YouTube and find something I
exactly.
want to listen to.
Exactly. And I love one of the reasons that I started doing those little transcription videos is like that's what I do in my free time, as nerdy as that sounds. Like if I've got 5 minutes to myself, which is becoming rarer and rarer these days, I
Right.
will literally find a transcription like that and just watch it go by and listen. And that's fun to me, you know? Um, so people were like, "Oh, this is a great idea, great idea. How did you come up with this?" I was like, "Well, I just decided to turn on a camera while I do what I normally do at home because I'm just a big nerd."
But you're a big nerd who makes money doing what he likes to do.
I guess so. I guess that's a good way to put it.
Okay, so we were going to talk also about that listening was the biggest thing that's holding back your jazz band, but did we kind of already cover the material within the articulation?
I think we did. I just a couple more things that I think could be valuable.
Hmm.
You do not, I understand the pressure that band directors are under, right? So like I know you always have a concert or a festival or a competition that you're under the gun for, right? And I understand that we none of us have enough time to rehearse our ensembles, but if you can figure out a way to make them listen, even if it's just for a couple minutes every day.
Yep.
So the perfect way to do this is have music playing when they come in the door,
Hmm.
right? Just have something on. Um, it will make a huge difference. And then going back to the thing that I was saying is like, not every student is going to like everything that you play. And I think it's really important to not try to force them to like uh, what you're playing because well, this person was the biggest influence on me. How could they not like Clark Terry? How could they not like John Coltrane? But kids are going to like what they like.
Hmm.
And
And that's
what
going
you
to
should
change. It's going to change through time too.
exactly. And what you should try to do is play a huge variety of music for them, right? So go from Charlie Parker one day to Snarky Puppy the next day to whatever. Try to bounce around as much as you possibly can. And you're going to be amazed after a while of doing this, you're gonna get those sort of like light bulb moments from kids where one day they're gonna come in and there's gonna be something playing and they're actually gonna ask you, who is
Hmm.
this?
Hmm.
Who is this? Instead of talking to their friends and like completely ignoring the music seemingly. Wow, this is really good. Who is this? And then they're gonna start listening,
Hmm.
right?
They're
And you're
going
gonna
to
get yeah, go ahead.
then they're going to come into you and say, "Hey, did you hear this?" And I've never heard what these kids have listened. It's like, how do I
Mhm.
not know this recording? How do I know? The kids always come in with like, and a lot of it's standard stuff that I should know and I've
Right?
never heard before.
Right. Like you'd be amazed at if you play the right, and it's funny what they like and what they don't like.
Hmm.
Um, so for instance, like a lot of times we get into this mindset where like the older something is, the less they're gonna like it, right? But I mean, Louis Armstrong,
Mm.
it's truly amazing the universal appeal of that man's music because I've got, middle school kids that I'll play a bunch of stuff for, and I'm not getting any response from them, no matter what I play. And then one day I'll put on, a recording of Lewis playing the Hot Fives or something from like the 1920s, and all of a sudden, what is this? What is this, Mr. Manella? Like, who is this? And then they pull out their Spotify. Okay, I'm gonna listen to this today.
Hmm.
It's really amazing. So you've got to commit to it for the long term, right? Like even if you're not seeing results from it right away,
Hmm.
just keep playing that music for them over and over and over and over again. And quite honestly, even if you never find something that they like, they're
Hmm.
still absorbing that information.
I mean, secondhand smoke works even if you're not smoking. So I mean,
Exactly.
it's just musical secondhand smoke, only positive instead of negative.
Man, that is a great way to put it. Get away with words, Kyle.
Yeah, man. So the listening part and the improvisation go into it because if we have say an hour and a half jazz band rehearsal and you have it twice a week, we got to get all the tunes ready, right? So those are the two things that I think we forget to do. We just talked a lot about listening, but the improvisation in the big band too, I find is something I try to do every time, even if
Yes.
it's we're all improvising over the B flat major scale in between the exercises we're doing, like whatever. But
Hmm.
to me, the bigger point is under program for your group, like just shoot a little lower, which would then free you up and allow you to do this. And I mean, has Timberlane in all the years that's been an amazing program, right? For all the people who've been through it and who've built it and made it amazing.
Hmm.
Have they ever gone to a festival? I would be curious. And has any judge ever told them, "You guys sound really good, but the music isn't hard enough for you"? Like,
No,
has that ever happened? No.
no,
So I think if everybody just goes, "All right, why don't we just back off on the lit just a little bit?" That then frees you up to do this jazz education thing, and then of course your kids are going to be better.
absolutely. And then the curve of their improvement is gonna start to hockey stick. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Because you do get to a point where it's like, I mean, what are we doing at the end of the day when we teach improvisation and jazz harmony and stuff? We're still getting these students a lot better at their instrument,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we're not ignoring that aspect by teaching jazz improvisation.
Yep.
We're actually accentuating that aspect. Well,
You're,
think about it in a different way. Oh, I could do this thing where like when I'm done practicing my etudes, I can just make stuff up. And they're
mm-hmm.
going to find new paths around their instrument. They're going to try to make different sounds. They're going to learn a lot just from that act of improvising,
Mm-hmm.
and it will benefit. A rising tide lifts all boats, right? So you're really going to start to see it pay off, maybe not
Mm-hmm.
in month 2 of the year, but certainly by the end of the year you're going to start to see that. And going back to the Timberlane thing, Tony DeBartolomeo and Ken Clark, like two of my biggest mentors of life, not
Mm-hmm.
just in music. um they make it a point to spend a certain portion of the rehearsal on improvisation because
Mm-hmm.
they know from being jazz musicians themselves, especially Ken, like they know the benefit from that. they know what real life is like as a jazz musician, and that like at the end of the day, jazz is improvised music. So if you are not doing some of that in the classroom, essentially you're doing jazz a disservice,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is not music that we play the same way every time. So you have to teach it. You really, really do.
And by teaching to their skills rather than their repertoire, what you're doing is like it's the old adage: you teach someone to fish rather than giving them a fish, right? They'll eat
Exactly.
forever. So you're doing the same thing.
Exactly.
We so there was one other item that we want to talk about before I ask you a final question,
Sure.
um, which I've not prepared you for, so I apologize.
Uh-oh.
um, this is basically where we want to talk about practicing simple things by ear, right? Copying things by ear, whether it be tunes, heads of tunes, whatever. So, what are some ways that you approach that?
Nursery rhymes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you, this is like the best thing you can possibly do. Teach somebody to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, right? Pop Goes the Weasel.
It's also
Things
an
that,
amazing it's also an amazing way to teach 6/8. I have 6/8 PDFs, and literally all we're playing is nursery rhymes of 6/8 because they know 6/8.
yep.
And then okay, I apologize.
No,
Nursery
it's
rhymes.
okay.
Yeah.
And that's like there's so many different concepts that you can teach with these simple tunes. And the beautiful thing about them is they generally stay in one key,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no modulation happening, no nothing like that. And it just starts to show them, oh, my ear is like a really, really valuable tool for playing music,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's just, 99% of their time is spent with a piece of paper in front of them,
Right.
right? And it really does limit what they're capable of
And
because the
it's
reading,
funny. It's funny
yeah,
because my I have two kids who both play piano and are good musicians at the elementary age. One reads music all day long and loves it, and you take the music away and she like doesn't know what to play. The
right?
other one can read music but doesn't want to, and he wants to just do whatever he wants. So there we have both types of students.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And those nursery rhymes are great because jazz, I think sometimes we make this delineation that's like not always or is really never appropriate between like classical and jazz
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, concert band and jazz band. I mean, both styles of music use like the Western form of harmony
Mm-hmm.
and all the same scales, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So jazz melodies are not all that different from classical melodies.
Mm-hmm.
So just learning these simple little nursery rhymes, I mean, that's going to go a long way toward providing your student with the skills that they're going to need to like sort of get to that next level and rely on their ear a little bit more and not be totally freaked out when you take away that sheet of music or never
Mm-hmm.
put it in front of them in the first place.
Well, it's funny. This is one of those episodes that I'm gonna have to go back and listen, but not just. I usually go back and listen some just to see how things go, but to actually listen with a piece of paper and be like, because you've given me a checklist of things that I'm gonna change going through. A couple episodes ago, we did a middle school hang, and Jean Quinn said the thing that kept her fresh for almost 40 years as a teacher was every year she tried to change something.
That's beautiful.
So I'm very thankful that you've given me a number of things to go back and rethink and to try differently.
And I want to mention one more thing that I feel like is super, super important. Um, a lot of us, when we go through our college music programs before we become music teachers, I think one of the major liabilities of college music programs, especially with jazz, is that the education starts at Charlie Parker.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts in the 1950s and it goes forward. So what we have as students graduating from those programs is we only teach jazz starting at 1950 and going forward because that's all we've been presented with,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that has a way of compounding and snowballing throughout the decades and ages and all that stuff. And that was me. That was 100% me. And then I started this band called the Soggy Po Boys, me and some friends. And our thing was that we wanted to play music from the 1920s to the 1940s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like New Orleans based music. And it was the most eye opening thing of my entire life because I realized there's this wealth of music that is so much simpler than bebop, but is just as deep and fun to play and amazing as the stuff that came, after Charlie Parker, right?
Is there a place to find?
And that's what I was going to mention. I'm going to send you a link, and maybe you could put it in the show notes
I'd love
of
to.
this free reel book. It's called the New Orleans Sea Jam reel book, and it probably has about 1,500 tunes that are all from that era. And if you are like exhausted from trying to teach your kids bebop, which it exhausts me, reach back a little bit further. Go back to the music of the 1920s. The melodies are some of the most gorgeous, memorable, simple melodies that you could ever learn. And to tell you the truth, I've just like fallen in love with that music. And I spend upwards of 50% of my time really digging into everything that happened before 1940.
And you can find recordings easily.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can find anything these days. So it's pretty fantastic.
That's awesome. I would like to close. You've given us amazing messages already. Are there any other like big picture messages you might have to band directors who are listening? Maybe I don't know what it is, but you're a music teacher. You consider yourself a band director?
I mean, I do work in that setting a little bit, but no, I'm not. Band directors are the most amazing people on the planet, and I don't consider myself one because I don't have the skills that they have, what they do every day. Like I don't do that on a regular basis, so I can't claim that title because I have too much respect for all the band directors out there.
So you should get your dad this shirt that I'm wearing. You should get, and Ken and Tony. It's a shirt that says band director because freaking miracle worker is not an official job title.
And truer words have never been spoken.
All right, Nick, thank you very much. This was great. A great hang. Again, if everybody could check out the 10-minute jazz lesson podcast and go back and use things. I know I'm going to use it a lot. I've only dipped my toes in it a little bit. I appreciate your time very much, Nick.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. It was great to reconnect. And I think what you're doing with this podcast is absolutely amazing. And this is definitely going to be on my list every week now.
Even as a non-band director.
Absolutely, man. I can always learn something.
All right. So as Clark Terry would say, keep on keeping on.
You got it, man.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.